Good afternoon and welcome. They say experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So I've done a lot of that already. And I can save you a few headaches if you ask the right questions, I guess. Just a couple things before I get started. If you, on the table out here in the back, I have some more of these poisoning here. If you're want to save a little paper and you're a tree hugger, even if you're not, you just don't want paper laying around the office, I can email this to you. My email address is at the back or at the top of the article, I think it is, pretty sure. But we can get you that if you need it. I can email it to you. This was printed in Family Life in 1993. I have no idea why nobody read that. Or at least it didn't seem like they did. But anyway, this will give you a really good rundown of what happened. How did we get taken into the chemical farming mindset? Why did that happen? It talks about some of the damage that was done, and this was in 93. That is how many years ago? Does anyone do math? 30. It was a bunch of years ago. I read that and I thought, whoa, somebody knows some things. Anyway, I dug that up again recently and reprinted it with their permission. And the other thing I have is here for small farmers, especially if you do produce, you might be interested in this little magazine, the Steward's Journal. It's done by Amish in Delano, Tennessee. They don't have a bank account, you're going to have to send them your cash if you want to sign up, but it's worth it. And I have some free ones here while you decide. And then some things you can use to send for it. But yeah, so, okay, so in some ways I don't feel like I learned very much, but looking back, I just want to share with you some of the reasoning that went into our journey and what are some things we learned along the way that brought us to where we are today. At the very beginning, I began the organic journey because I just couldn't make sense out of spraying something that was so deadly poisonous that if your children got into it, they could be killed. And I know we had plenty of chemical salesmen that were willing to drink it straight out of the can, and did, and died of cancer later. Nobody told you that little detail, but yeah, it was in their best interest to have you believe that they're watching out for you and wouldn't allow anything, FDA, it's approved, all this, it wouldn't allow anything that would hurt you. I think the last couple of years exposed really well that the government is not watching out for you in most cases. And if that's a shock to you and burns your biscuit, well, I can talk to you about that later. But let me just mess with your mind for about 40 minutes and see if I can convince you, if you're not already convinced, that we need to take a whole new look at what we are doing to our food supply. To most people, food is food. They get it at the grocery store. Who needs farmers? What does it matter how they raise it? What does that really matter? But I would suggest, and I don't think we probably have any people here like that, but if you're not a farmer and you buy all your food from the grocery store, that you cozy up to your neighbor that sells raw milk or something and ask him for some reasoning behind what he does. And you might be surprised what you could learn. But farmers are farmers and they help each other out. Sometimes they can be pretty simple. I heard the story of a man that moved into a new community and he didn't know anyone around him. But the second day he was there, his neighbor showed up and he said, I'm your neighbor from just over the hill. I'm here to help you with anything you need. If you need anything, just holler. I'll show you how to do without. I'd really like to have a neighbor like that. I've had a few like that. They showed me a lot of things. And then there was a farmer that was probably more like me. I didn't go to college, but this man went to college and he decided he's going to do better than his dad. I thought that too. And he would farm by the book. So one day he was bringing a load of hay in, small bales, and went over through a ditch and half the load fell off. So he wasn't sure what the book would say about what you do. And he went and looked and the book said reload it. So most of our answers are fairly simple, but I will admit that in my early days I couldn't really get answers for a lot of the questions I had, but today it's amazing. There is a lot of experience out there and a lot of people that are willing to share their experiences with you and can save you some of the ridiculous consequences and train wrecks that happen if you aren't paying attention. But in all we do, there's always unintended consequences. Things we couldn't possibly think of ahead of time. And I realized that in the first couple of years I farmed, my father was there watching, and I switched to organic almost right away. I tend to be kind of radical and quick, and I'm willing to take some risks, and my wife worried about that too. That's probably why she has more gray hair than I do. But she supported me very well. My father supported me well, but he worried about it. And you know, the first thing we needed to understand, and we didn't understand this well at all, was our context. And if you have time to listen tomorrow afternoon, I will share with you a lot more about why that is important. But everyone starts somewhere with some kind of experience, and they say that some of your experiences in life and ways you help people will come from your woundedness. Well, I have a story about that. So when I was 16, I was wounded in my heel. I hurt myself in a farm accident, and it took a year for that to heal, and I was on antibiotics the entire year. That was back in the days when antibiotics were the miracle drug. You just used it, you didn't ask questions. That was 45 years ago, 50 years ago. You didn't ask any questions, you just used it. Well, I'm living with the consequences of that today. And one day I was discussing this with a health professional, and I was told that, would there be any chance that your parents used antibiotics? And I got to thinking about that, and my mom had an accident just before I was conceived, about 6 months before, and she was on antibiotics from a pretty serious infection. So, generational sins, things we do, have unintended consequences. I would be extremely cautious to use antibiotics on your children unless it's a life-threatening situation. Extremely cautious. But yeah, understanding organic farming is kind of like thinking the way they thought 500 years ago. Do you realize that 500 years ago, you didn't own land in those places? There was no such thing as a deed. You farmed in what? You had a space of land that was generally considered yours, and you used it with consideration for those who would come after you, or would use it for other purposes once you couldn't. And I think the thing that has changed my mindset the most about farming is that I will not be here very long. And someone will inherit the problems I leave behind. And it's incumbent on me to leave the things that I use in better condition than I found them. And we have the tools to do it. That's what's exciting. And that's what I want to share tomorrow in my talk about the 6 principles of soil health. These are not new. You probably use them on your farm. But if you understand how they work together, you can do it in 5 years what it took us 30 years to do. And as last I checked, time is our most precious commodity. And we just can't be careful enough with how we use that. So, understanding that organic principles helps you understand that we live in a commons. It doesn't matter if you do have a deed for your farm, and you do own this. If your neighbor sprays right next to you and the wind's in your direction, you're going to get the damage or the benefit from that. I've experienced that firsthand. And if he does what my neighbor did, which I don't blame him, he asked his county agent, he said, is there any possible way that Roundup could have killed the trees on the line between us? Oh, no, not a chance. Well, it was just interesting. I just said, well, that could be. I mean, I can't really speak to this from a scientific standpoint other than my friends who are arborists and working with fruit trees say that's not uncommon at all, to lose fruit trees and grapevines and things like that from spray drift. And I had started hundreds of those trees with no problem, but on the line it was different. So think about it. We do damage not only that, but other people's things. You know, we have a penchant for thinking that once we're done for the day, everything is done. But a farmer was explaining to me that he has enough of soil from his farm in the Gulf that he should be able to go fishing there for free. I said, actually, you ought to be in jail.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at beating around the bush. I could have been nicer about that. But seriously, there is a lot of people in the Gulf of Mexico who no longer have jobs because of our poor farming practices. 30 years ago, that was a stretch for me to think through that. And I think we have accepted somewhat in 30 years or in our short life here that there is unintended consequences, not only for us, but other people. No way we can help all of that. But if you are damaging your neighbor's things, whether he be a mile or 1,000 miles away, you better think through that a bit. And especially because you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. It isn't necessary. One thing that impressed me from the get-go about organic farmers when I started buying grain from farmers I did not know, places far away, to raise organic turkeys that I started doing in 1987 or 8, and still do to this day, is that you could depend on what they told you. You didn't have to worry about, generally speaking, it just wasn't crooks there. Now I realize that one thing that changed in 30 years is that there's a lot more people doing it just for the money. You know, just for the money, just because it pays better, perhaps, and it is coming to the place that organic means less and less. And somebody told me just here today that in the West it's terrible what's happening to the organic business, and I know there's claims made, and I no doubt they're true, that there's a lot of organic grain grown in Russia and other countries around there, and Ukraine, and that sometimes shiploads of grain become organic on the way over. You heard those stories. Well, because of that, I don't buy any foreign grain for what I do, because I want to make the claim that I know where my grain comes from. And that has been helpful. But in spite of all the crookedness in the business, if there is that, and I can't prove that there is or isn't, I'm suspicious that it has. There has been times when it was misused. You have a responsibility for what you do on your farm. And the beauty of it is that while you can't control the weather, there's just a lot of things you cannot control. You can control how you farm. And it will make a difference. And it has been more than a little pleasant to have landowners come to me and say, we like the way you farm. Would you farm my farm? And I said, well, now, I don't know what you're expecting for rent. I'm not into some price war. I'm not interested in taking it away from another farmer, and I won't pay you what he's probably paying you. So if that's what your interest, if more money is your interest, you're not getting it from me. And that was not his interest. So there are landlords around that do appreciate that. There's some that don't care. And we pay all kinds of different prices because land is organic. But if the landlord understands how critical and how much time it takes to get land to be organic, whether it's certified or not, and have the benefits of the more nutrition that you get from whatever it is that you're growing, you will have a landlord that will be understanding of that investment of your time. Not always the case. Sometimes they have their farms to pay for. They paid $1 million for the farm. I don't know why. But anyway, not everyone gets to inherit the farm like I did. Well, I didn't inherit it, but I did pay Lancaster County price. And for perspective, those of you who aren't from the county here, a recent farm sold for $50,000 an acre. And I find that troubling from several standpoints. It's, one more time, it's the commodification of land for my profit. And I want you to make a profit when you farm. I think that's totally legit. But there's all kinds of ways to squeeze more out of it and degrade and put more land into more downgrading situations and put buildings on it, which, okay, we have to build somewhere. I get that. But I think it's incumbent on us to not use our land in a way that is going to make it more difficult for your neighbors. There's more ways than just spraying. Okay, it's a very, very important thing to consider. How I use land isn't just how I till it, or how I seed it, or what I do with it, but we are in a community. And one of the key aspects of being organic is water infiltration rates. I would shudder to think of 200 inches of rain. We had 60 in a year not too long ago, and it was disastrous to our program. We're grass farmers. We don't generally till any land unless we're redoing pasture, and we avoid that with everything in us. More and more don't do that because you can restructure land in a good way with cattle. But you can farm in such a way that increases the infiltration rate from an inch or two an hour, what it is now, to 20, which we never get. Early in my farming career, and I had my pictures with me, I'd show you a picture where our cows were standing just the other day, covered with grass now, but it was corn, and then we had 5 inches of rain one Sunday morning in an hour. You didn't want to see what that fodder looked like. It was running down the road next to that field. It becomes, to lose, they say there's an average of a ton of topsoil is about this thick on an acre. Spread over an acre, a ton of topsoil is about as thick as this paper, which you would never miss 1 ton of topsoil. You couldn't tell that it happened to lose that. So if you lost an inch, you not only lost a lot of soil that is now doing damage to where it is, wherever that is, whatever is happening to that soil, it's not where God created it to belong. But you also lost the ability to store water. And the infiltration rate is one of your key things that will change when you change your farming practices. Less tillage, soil covered all the time. If you do till, it should be no-till. And I know that the question you'll ask is, well, what about spraying, controlling weeds? Well, there's ways to do that without spraying out too. And yeah, your fields will not look like you would have seen on the cover of Farm Journal in 1985, but you don't need fields like that to be profitable, and Farm Journal will not pay your bills, neither will your neighbors do that for you. You're going to do that. So I would encourage you to do what's futuristic. Farming is like the Christian life. It's a long-term thing. We don't start today only to quit tomorrow. We start to continue. And the older generation used to have a thing where they would, if they owned the farm they didn't live on, they would visit that farm a couple times a year to see if the person that was there farming could stay. And with that, I'd like to add that the absentee ownership of land is one of the most harmful things that can happen to land. That is land that you own that you don't live on. It's the care and the love of the land, and I don't mean that in a bad way, that preserves land. You appreciate it as an asset that you were given. I think my dad spent a good share of his life hoping that one of his children would take on the farm and enjoy it as much as he did. And I don't know if I enjoyed it as much as he did, but I will say that without some vision there on his part and on my grandfather's part, I'm standing on their shoulders. I have nothing that wasn't given to me. Nothing. The privileges I have to do what I'm doing was given to me. First of all by God, of course, but then by parents and grandparents who fought. My dad bought the farm we live on for $17,000 in 1941. And he envisioned, I think he had 3 married sons and 1 single one. Single one just get a farm. Too bad. But anyway, he wanted his sons to farm, and I think until a generation or two ago, that was really the vision of most farmers who loved the land and loved the opportunity and the lifestyle, and they just wanted their children to experience that. Well, my father had 11 children. Big ecological problem if you only have 1 farm. And I had 11 children, so I don't know. It's a bit of a conundrum to figure out how to peacefully arrange that can be moved from one generation to another. And I can say with thankfulness that we just passed it on to my 43-year-old son and his wife and 9 children, and consider that a very, very much of an honor that they were able and willing to do that and enjoy it. To see them enjoy it is a powerful thing, and probably one of the things that makes retirement, which I don't like that, in a sense in which I consider it a very big privilege. But it is what it is. And to see them benefit from my father's vision and my grandfather's vision and my vision is powerful, beyond words. I don't deserve that. And spending time with grandchildren can be enlightening to see what they catch. I was working with my son collecting bales one day, and my 3-year-old and then 3.5-year-old grandson said to me when I got the tractor, he said, "Grandpa, you should else cut your hair or comb them. They look messy." I had just tipped the skid loader front and hit the wagon and broke the window and bumped my head in the process. My hair never in place anyway, my wife can tell you that. And he said another thing, it was an honor for you to break that window. He said, "You really should be spanked for that." And my dad could do it hard. Well, I had to inform him that I used to spank your dad. No, you did not. Yeah, I did. Okay, so when I see my children and grandchildren enjoying something that was a gift to me, that is really why I do what I do. And again, not everyone. There's lots of people in this county and other counties that would have loved the privilege that I had. And I have no idea why I was given that. It's not because I'm a good person or deserving or anything like that. But as I saw that coming, as a young father, I just could not imagine myself continuing a farm the way we were, and the things we were struggling with, the soil washing away. My dad he loved soil, and he the then recommendation to save soil was to build terraces and all that, and there was such like anyway, we didn't continue that, and what we're working on now is to drain soil, but in a different method. And I want to get into that more tomorrow, because I think it's critical to moving forward. It's like I told a young farmer recently that asked me, I said, if you do this right, every year it will give you a better opportunity for the next. And if you do it the way you were doing it, you're going backwards, right? Yeah, he said, I can't continue that. So it's really important for us to understand that what we do can be a benefit not only to us, but also to our neighbors and the people around us, the people that eat our food. Critically important that we get it, that toxins are not a neutral thing. And today, I can't tell you the millions of tons of glyphosate that is sprayed on this country, but it is shameful. And it will be the mark of this generation to have done that without thinking and moving ahead. And that's why I think it's important for you to read this article on poisoning the earth and understand what happened so that it doesn't happen again. Meanwhile, in my short history, when I started my journey, I was grasping for, how can I do this? And after a couple of years of row cropping and struggling with weeds and doing well with the yield part, I still wasn't happy with all the tillage and weeds, and I just had problems. Well, now in our journey now, and I'll show you more about this tomorrow, we see weeds as not a weed as much as an indicator and a balancer. I have a friend who had a field that grew up on him while he was planting corn and doing other things. He had a field he was going to plant in alfalfa, and it just grew up in weeds, and he chopped it and put it in the silo. And he had heard that some of those weeds are pretty good. And so someone came around from Cornell University from New York, and said, we'd like you to enter your hay silage in a contest. And he said, sure, this is what I have, and he sent it, and he won the first prize. You'd think alfalfa would have done it. There's no alfalfa in this, it was weeds. It was weeds. So I'm telling you, we've been sold a bill of goods. And with that, we paid for it. We not only have been sold something that isn't working, we paid dear for that. And this, let me give you just one example. Seeds is the number one thing I think we can do to benefit us, especially as grass farmers, but even as any farmer. If you can't save your seed, you should think again. You really should. Because seed is a lot like cattle, and we've seen this powerfully in cattle. When we started bringing our genetics for the cattle, both the father and the mother from the farm, running on the farm, we saw powerful changes. Don't buy semen from some other place in the boat. I don't care how it is. You can test your bull for $12. We test every calf that's born. It takes a split second to get the sample out of its ear. We send that to a lab, and for about 14 apiece, you can get all the information you need, and a lot you don't. So, and for seed, what's really emerging as the opportunity of my lifetime is to grow our own seed on our own farm. Okay, you say, wait a minute. You don't have to get a grass seed attachment for my combine. No, you don't. All you have to do is be patient. Do an experiment. I'll show you a picture of this tomorrow if you're here. Of how, okay, so we had a soil health academy on our farm, and as an experiment, we left 2 acres untouched from 1st of April until the soil health academy in September. Nothing. And I have to tell you, I drove out the lane every day and I thought, who in the world is trying to prove what? It was weedy. It looked terrible. And it smelled at one point like a wheat field. The grasses were drying up and dropping their seeds. Precisely what we were interested in. And then by September, it had perked up and there was some really nice grazable grass there. And that's what we do with our grass. We don't make hay on the home farm. We graze it. And we like to have dairy quality because we do milk cows, and it doesn't matter how much they milk. So the day of the Soil Health Academy, we looked at that, and Alan, the teacher, said, wow, he said, this is the quality that I'm looking for. He said, you need to do this on the rest of the farm. But you know what? We left it go yet another 2 months and saw tremendous, much more depth in the aggregation layer. Super important. And that's all about water infiltration. I would venture a guess that if we did a water infiltration test, and you can do this, it's not rocket science, you just simply get a pipe this big, figure out how much water it takes to make an inch of rain, and pour it in there and time how long it takes for it to disappear. You hammer that into the soil. There's directions for this. You can get it all on YouTube, I'm sure, of course, or I can explain it to you. And I think we'd have an infiltration rate there of approaching 10 to 20 inches already in such a short time. Now, if I was a vegetable farmer, there's a few of those in there, I would do some of that. Rest. It's called rest. Soil needs rest. And it needs to express all the seeds that are in there, and I know how you're thinking, I don't want them in my vegetable patch. Okay, there's a plan for that. We're not going to get into that here. But you can deal with the weed problem. And it is possible to have soil that is so loose that it just doesn't grow weeds really well. And the ones that it does grow are easy to deal with. I know that sounds idealistic, but it is and has been done. And it is being done and has been done. The problem with killing pests and weeds, especially pests. How many of you like coffee? You like coffee? Unbelievable. Okay, I do too, I confess. So, you realize that coffee is one of the most sprayed crops in the world? You want to think about this when you drink your next cup of coffee. I'd recommend organic for 2 reasons. Do it because I'm an organic farmer and I told you to. And because you don't need those extra spray materials in there. They spray coffee with fungicide generally weekly, unless they have some other plant. And I didn't quite get this, but an organic inspector was also an advisor that was flying to Africa after he left our farm and to consult for a very large coffee plantation in Africa. And I said, so do they use spray on coffee? I didn't know. He said, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. But they are trying to get away from it. And that is the mentality that we should have, not just because of market, but because of people eat and drink your food. It should be a no-brainer that we want to present to them the very best that we can. Not second rate. And so we could ask questions about how all this should come to be, and it's important that we do that. How much time do I have yet? 4:55 it is?
5:10.
5:10, 10 minutes. Okay, well I appreciate you holding your questions till now, but if you do have a question while I'm finishing up here, raise your hand and I'll try to get to it very soon. But one of the problems with the way we farm is a misunderstanding of what God told Adam in the garden. Or, I'm sure he was in the garden anymore, but he told Adam, what did he say? We heard it this morning. Take dominion. Do you ever check out what that means? If I understand that right, it means to steward. Now, there's more than one way to take dominion, but I traveled in some foreign countries, including Paraguay, and I could have cried when I saw Paraguay the first time. It was washing away. And when you went to Iguazu Falls, you could see it. There was more soil going over there than ever should have been. And the early farmers, Mark Eichhorn, told me that first years, they planted beans and never sprayed them. They cultivated them once and walked them for weeds and never sprayed them. Last time, somebody just told me today that now they're breaking even and barely that, going backwards. Their soil is washing away. In 40 years, they practically destroyed that little country. Poor farming practices, and Mennonites were first ones on the job. That is sad, and it is something that we need to really think about. And it gives you pause when you think of Mennonites going into missions. That's why we have a conference like this, so that we understand some of these things before we tell others how to do them. I've seen a lot of mission situations where it was more like, we will show you how to farm. Completely out of context. We didn't know how to farm in that area. And there's a difference even in the USA, just having traveled over the USA the last couple of years and seeing how droughty and dry things can be. They have a different context, a much more brittle environment than we do, so they have to do things completely different. But I'd like to ask you a question. There was over 50 million buffalo here when Columbus discovered America by a low estimate. There's not that many cows here today, dairy cows. Okay, I'm not sure if you had beef cows onto that, what it would look like, but nobody put any silage away, planted any corn, spread any manure, did anything like that. What did they know? What did the Indians know about letting things alone? You know, we should think about that. Just a thought. Any questions? Yes.
You talked about these beans that were not sprayed and how things went backward. I didn't quite get what do you think they did wrong, or what made that soil wash away?
Well, number one of the principles of soil is to keep it covered. And that becomes way more critical when you are in a tropical climate because of the heat factor. It can get to be 110 degrees. And if you have air temperatures of 110, you have dark, rich black soil at 140. You will not have, things are going backwards. Soil bacteria are dying by the millions. And by the time you get that covered and shaded, the damage has been done. And you can, at first, I'm guessing, just guessing, I didn't see their soil reports, but I'm guessing that their organic matter would have easily been in the 10% range, and that's a healthy range. I would say a lot of Lancaster County organic land that's well managed is that high. But every time you till that, you can lose 1%. So you want to think about how many times can I till this? You may not have to do that every time, but it becomes extremely, the more we see the business of keeping soil covered, the more grudgingly we till anything, other than with the lightest tillage we can think of. Any other questions?
When you get a new plot of land to prepare for grazing, what's your approach typically? How much are you, just putting the animals on there and letting them do the work and letting it take time until it is where you want it to be? And how much are you, going in with a ripper and seeder or whatever?
Really a good question. We rented a farm a couple years ago. It was so rough. The people that did our haymaking for us or did the chopping said that, I think it was the merger operator said, man, that was hard on my kidneys. And he had a good tractor with a good seat, but it was like, so we redid that one, and right, of course, as fate would have it, we had a big rainstorm right over the time that was bare. Oh, that was just crushing to see that thing. I don't know how we could have prevented that. We did half of it at a time because it was all kind of on one slope. And we tried to make sure the drainage ditches were open and things were in shape. But that is a very important question of what do we do? What we do is immediately cover the soil. Like we got a new farm this fall, someone asked us to take over, and so we covered the soil with a no-till drill immediately, and we will probably no-till again, and a good chance we'll let that rest for a year. Just let it alone. What happens when you let land alone is when you build that aggregation layer, you have a lot of heritage seeds down in there, believe it or not, like buffalo grass, whoever wants buffalo grass, big blue stem, whoever wants big blue stem, 25% protein, you pay money for alfalfa to do 25% protein. And plus, the whole thing, you'll hear this from Brian Beechey tomorrow, I just talked to him a bit ago, if you take his class on biodiversity, but the synergism of many different plants working together in the soil is such a powerful thing. It reminds me of community. We need community. We need community in soil. Plants talk to each other. It's been documented that trees will talk to each other for miles while their roots are intertwined. We were at the redwood forest. The roots only go a foot deep in a lot of those trees, but he said they're intertwined with each other so much they can hardly fall down until one is taken down, the roots die, and you weaken the whole forest. So yeah, to prepare soil for what we wanted to do with it and to prepare it to start building topsoil. You can build topsoil maybe half to inch or more a year. You think about it. An inch or two of topsoil will make a big difference in what you can grow and the water holding capacity. Now, if I got 220 inches of rain a year like we heard this morning, I wouldn't worry about how much water it would hold. I would worry about how much drainage there is. But with our soil, with 40 inches or less, now we have a unique privilege here in Lancaster County to get that fairly evenly. So it's a blessing, but If you don't, it's good insurance to have soil that holds water and infiltrates. So I just want to cover a little bit what will be covering tomorrow, and I'll have some photos of the farm and how our farm has changed in 20 years. But we're going to be talking about the 4 ecosystem processes. I'll have a slide then, but the critical factor of the 6-3-4 principle, the 3 adaptive stewardship things that you need to do, and the 6 principles of soil health, that if you put these in practice, and you're probably doing quite a few of them now, regardless of how you farm. But I had an experience a year or 2 ago. I was on a farm in northern Pennsylvania, not an organic farm. It was a large dairy that did a lot of things that I wouldn't have done. Didn't raise their cattle. Didn't do a lot of things that I could have suggested. But he, on a test, on a Haney soil test, he had better soil than I did. Well, then when I got to my soil consultant, I shook him up a little bit. I said, "You explain this to me. I've been organic for 25 years plus, and I want to know why he can do what he's done." And it's a really simple process, but it was probably partly his soil. You know, there's differences. I will admit that. But what he did was carefully covered soil. The day he harvested corn, he was planting no-till. That day, not tomorrow, not the next day. And in the spring, he never uncovered the soil. He just no-tilled and sprayed it. And a light spray, very light. And also, his liquid manure application from his 1,200 cow dairy was extremely light. Like no dairy in this area could afford to put that little manure on. And he got very good crops, which owed to his living soil. You know, you can have a live soil and still do a couple things that you probably should. I will admit that. But that is, we think, the beauty of grass farming. Most of Lancaster County should not be tilled. It should not be tilled. It should be covered with grass and have cattle on it. And I know you're thinking, well, I can't hardly process that. Me neither. But it would be helpful if it would be. So I think there's a few minutes here if there's a question.
What would your answer be? You mentioned these buffalo, and I agree with that. We know now that there's many more chicken houses, many more hog industries that are totally dependent on grain. What could the U.S. do to reverse that?
Yeah. Well, one of the most harmful things that happened to U.S. topsoil was grain subsidies. I mean, they pay you to do corn and wheat and soybeans. 3 of the most harmful crops you can grow. And, think about it. How many farmers that are doing corn and soybeans eat their corn and soybeans for breakfast? Do you ever think about that? I mean, that just don't make any sense to me. If you raise a crop you could never eat. Does that make sense to you? Somebody's going to eat it. Well, okay, 30% of the corn is turned into ethanol, which is another unbelievable move. If we care about greenhouse gases, we would never do that. But again, we can only control a little bit. But it's a good question. Confinement raised livestock have huge ecology explanations to make. Huge. I mean, it's like you have 2 problems. It's been documented very well that the food coming out of those confinement operations is is very inferior to other grass-fed types. And the other thing that happens is you have these animals in a very unhealthy environment. We won't get into puppy mills and all those kind of things, but I think we should think about how we use the gifts that God gave us. And if you understand the blessing of working with cattle that are on grass, it is just amazing to me that we can continue on and see improvement year after year that we only dreamed of. That bill's gone. Not that we don't have any problems, but it's so minute that it's